My first impression of Julia was kind of an unruly kid, not really very feminine or elegant, but real.
Let me give you a tip on a sure thing, okay?
She was really a diamond in the rough.
I'm gonna be slinging pizza for the rest of my life.
The camera loved her.
Julia is the X factor.
Julia Roberts is one of those women who I think is going to remain a star for the rest of her life.
Pretty Woman, former serial dater, turned married with children, Oscar winner. For over 20 years, Julia Roberts has wowed audiences all over the world.
Defining Julia Roberts is kind of like defining some kind of force of nature.
Someone once did this funny chart where it was like, you know, comparing the amount of smiles in her movies to how big the box office was, and they were like perfectly correlated.
So I said to Richard, you gotta wake her up a little bit. It was not acting, it was her.
She's one of the highest paid actresses in Hollywood, though she's often fared badly in matters of the heart.
2 or 3 days before the wedding, Julia called it off.
There are paparazzi on the lawn. There are helicopters buzzing overhead.
Not a good time to be Julia Roberts.
But it's Julia's on-screen talent in over 40 films that has earned her a place in the Hollywood pantheon.
When I think of Julia Roberts, I think that this woman's a movie star.
And it turns out that she is a really good actor.
She's grown up to be quite a woman.
In 1992, 25-year-old Julia Roberts was featured in one of the year's most talked about films.
Robert Altman's The Player, which is a great Hollywood black comedy, has a cameo from Julia Roberts, which isn't even credited in the titles.
Julia plays herself and is featured in the finale of the blockbuster film within Altman's film.
So all throughout the movie, there's a running gag about the biggest actors have to be cast in this movie. The Bruce Willises, the Julia Roberts. And at the end, we see Julia Roberts in the electric chair. And here comes Bruce Willis running down the prison hallway with the reprieve and takes a shotgun and the window explodes.
It took you so long.
Traffic was a bitch.
The fact that Julia Roberts is in that film as pretty much the biggest female American star shows how huge she had become.
When you can be yourself in an insider's movie about the seamy inside of Hollywood, in many ways that dubs you as in fact being part of that.
Movie, it's perfect.
Although she was a Hollywood insider by the time she was 25, Julia was originally a small-town girl from Georgia. She was born in Atlanta on October 28, 1967, to Walter and Betty Roberts.
You could really say that Julia grew up with acting in her blood. Julia's parents ran an acting school in Smyrna, Georgia. They made no money off of the thing, but it was really a labor of love for them.
It was kind of a hardscrabble existence because they didn't charge the parents very much for the children to come. There were a lot of expenses of putting on their shows.
Unfortunately, the money problems became bigger and bigger, and ultimately it led to their divorce.
Julia's parents split up when she was only 3 years old.
And this was a really tough experience for her because she absolutely adored her father, but her mother tried to keep the dad away from Julia and her siblings as much as possible.
And Walter would call and she wouldn't let him talk to the kids, and then she'd tell them that he didn't call.
Then, 5 years after the divorce, Walter Roberts died of cancer.
In fact, her mother was so successful at keeping the children apart from their father that Julia didn't even know that her father was terminally ill. And Julia wasn't even aware of the fact that he had died until she was told to dress for the funeral.
And just the shock of losing your father like that and not being in any way aware that it was a possibility must have been very difficult for her.
My father died when I was a young girl, and that's really traumatic despair for a young person. And to deal with that and to ask all the questions why and to try to ponder the really big immortality concept of life at 9 years old is I think more than any child should have to bear the burden of.
Julia's brother Eric was 12 years older and had been a star performer in their parents' acting program. While Julia was in grade school, Eric landed his first leading role in a feature-length film.
His first movie was King of the Gypsies, and his face was plastered over billboards all over the country. He was given a tremendous star buildup, and Julia was awfully impressed by that. He came back for the premiere of King of the Gypsies in a limousine, and, you know, she saw all of that, and she thought to herself, well, if he can do it, so can I.
Shortly after high school, Julia Roberts moved to New York to pursue acting, and she was signed with the Click modeling agency. She was very tall, she was very thin, she was unquestionably beautiful, but she never felt comfortable modeling.
Julia Roberts has been dubbed America's Pretty Woman, and most people will tell you that she's an extraordinary, beautiful woman. She never thought of herself that way. She said later on that they used to say I was a model because I wasn't yet an actress.
So she worked any number of odd jobs to make ends meet. She worked in an athlete's foot, she scooped ice cream, she did whatever she had to pay the bills. But she really had a tough time breaking into the business. She had an incredibly strong Georgia accent that made it hard for her to get roles.
Of course, she had Eric to help her. Julia and Eric were pretty close, considering that they were 12 years apart. Eric was very protective of Julia.
Eric was protective and supportive. To give Julia a leg up in her pursuit of acting, he used his own connections to pull some strings for his little sister.
Her brother got her a role in a Western that he was in called Blood Red.
Blood Red, Julia's first speaking role, was about a turn-of-the-century Italian immigrant family fighting the railroad for their land.
Julia played Eric's younger sister, and she looked absolutely lovely in the movie. She looked like a Gibson girl. She had her hair up and she wore white lace gowns and just very, very beautiful.
Make sure Marco isn't late today.
She looked very much like Eric's sister because she is Eric's sister. And she has one very dramatic scene in which she sees her father strung up and killed. And she does a very good job with it.
Eric helped his sister prepare for the particularly emotional scene.
What happened was Eric came over to her and he whispered something into her ear, and she broke down. And she said, I got the sense at that point that there was really a lot of stuff going on in that family. You know, that all he had to do was whisper something to her and she'd get so emotional. But that's how she handled that scene.
While waiting for Blood Red's delayed release, Julia landed 2 television roles.
She appeared in an episode of Miami Vice and in another TV show called Crime Story. She really had a sparkle of talent to her that you can see even now when you watch these appearances. She was really a diamond in the rough.
Who is he that he can get away with this?
But Julia wasn't satisfied with television roles. She wanted to be in films. And when she got the chance to try out for her first starring role in the girl band comedy Satisfaction, she came up with a plan.
So in order to get the part, she had to seem like a musician, which she wasn't.
Her manager lied to get her the part. Her manager said, oh, she can play the drums, and which she couldn't.
He quickly enrolled Julia in a crash course in drumming.
Everybody thought that would be the easiest instrument for her to learn how to play.
It turned out that the drummer role had been filled, but her manager's fib had put Julia in front of the film's casting agent, who liked what she saw.
But eventually she was cast as the bass player.
They had her learn to play a bass guitar as well as she could in order to fake it.
The part gave Julia a chance to shine.
Justine Bateman was the big name and the big star in that movie, but when you watch Julia Roberts in it, she absolutely overshadows Justine with her charisma and her talent.
Frankie and I want to take the van. Can I have the keys, please?
During production on Satisfaction, Julia's personal life also took a turn. She fell hard for co-star Liam Neeson.
They were wildly attracted to each other, and the people on the set said that they couldn't keep their hands off each other. He was a very attractive Irish actor, about 12 years her senior. They had a lot in common because they both had a father who died early.
Julia Roberts started the trend, a lifelong trend of dating her co-stars.
They quickly became an item, started living together in Venice Beach.
Julia had settled in California. It seemed like a wise move for the budding movie star. That is, until a swim in the Pacific put her life at risk. By 1988, 21-year-old Julia Roberts had had a minor role in the fluffy girl band movie Satisfaction. and had begun what would become a pattern of romancing her co-stars. But it was the indie sleeper, Mystic Pizza, that put Julia on the map.
When she got to the audition, she was amazed to find out that they wanted her for the role of Daisy, who was described in the script as the kind of girl men would kill for. And she said, I just didn't think of myself as the kind of girl men would kill for. Julia did the audition, and they told her, don't call us, we'll call you. And she realized that she probably hadn't gotten the role, and she asked why. And they said, well, you're not right. She's an ethnic girl. She's Portuguese. She's got black hair.
So Julia went back home, put all this black mousse in her hair to make herself look Portuguese, and went back to audition again. The guy who was auditioning opposite her ran his fingers through her hair at one point and got the black mousse all over his hands, but it didn't stop Julia from landing the part.
You know, she was a go-getter. She definitely wanted this, and she was willing to push as hard as she needed to.
Before Mystic Pizza was released, though, Julia's fledgling career and her life nearly came to an end.
Julia Roberts lived with Liam Neeson in Venice.
One day, Julia goes swimming in the Pacific Ocean and contracts spinal meningitis, which makes her deathly ill. She's hospitalized, she's on death's door, and Liam Neeson, by all accounts, is the world's best boyfriend.
He stayed by her side, nursed her back to health, took care of her.
Thanks to the loving support of her boyfriend and family, the young actress recovered and was able to relish her star turn in Mystic Pizza.
Julia Roberts was brilliant in that role. You couldn't forget that performance. It was the announcement that this was going to be someone to be reckoned with.
You really believe this 30-year-old guy is gonna leave his wife and live happily ever after with you? You're living in a f***ing romance novel, Cat.
Through Mystic Pizza, I could see an earthiness there. I could see someone who was accessible. You can get to like her. She was someone you knew.
Yeah, well, don't worry about me. I'm not gonna be slinging pizza for the rest of my life.
I was a critic and looking at it, and I was going, wow, who's this? And I think a lot of casting agents probably said the same thing, and that's what launched her.
Julia knew that she had captured the public's attention after a strange encounter in an Atlanta ladies' room.
She was in a stall doing her thing, and she heard another woman say, hey, girl in stall number 2, were you that woman in Mystic Pizza?
And Julia said, yeah. And she said, could I have your autograph? And Julia said, well, I'm a bit tied up right now.
Mystic Pizza also brought Julia to the attention of some of Hollywood's most powerful people, including the producers of the film version of the play, Steel Magnolias. Landing this role was a critical step in the young actress's ascension in Hollywood. And Julia, the ingenue, was in good company.
Olympia Dukakis and Sally Field and Daryl Hannah. It was this incredible ensemble cast. So, you know, it made Julia shine all that much more.
She really sunk herself into that role.
A scene in which Julia's character suffers a serious diabetic seizure was particularly harrowing.
The people on the set said they were absolutely astonished, that it was frightening to watch her.
Come on now, there the girl. Yes.
She supposedly, after takes, would have to be carried back to her trailer because she had, gotten herself into such a weakened state.
And what Julia said was that she had thought what the insides of her body must be like when she's having a diabetic fit. And she said she sort of pulled it all up.
There's something to be said for the fact that she is finding room in that big smile of hers to connote pain.
Both Hollywood insiders and moviegoers took notice.
And she won a Golden Globe for the performance. She was nominated for an Oscar. So obviously people felt that she'd done a good job.
Steel Magnolias had a huge impact on her personal life, too, because that's where she met Dylan McDermott, another one of her co-stars that she ended up dating.
She was still with Liam Neeson at the time, but was overpowered by her attraction to Dylan McDermott. Classic Julia, trading one man in for another.
Apparently Liam Neeson was brokenhearted, and she just dumped him.
With a new boyfriend and a performance that was the talk of the industry, Julia set her sights on what would be the pivotal role of her career. Vivian, a prostitute who falls for a wealthy John. But first, she had to charm director Gary Marshall.
My first impression of Julia was kind of an unruly kid, not really very feminine or elegant, but real.
My first impressions of Julia was she's tall. She's so thin. She needs 15 more pounds on her.
When Julia was cast in Pretty Woman, the co-star that Gary Marshall had in mind for her was Richard Gere, but he was hesitant to take the part. So Gary Marshall basically used Julia Roberts as bait and asked her to go and wheedle Richard Gere into taking the role.
So we brought Julia to meet Richard. We flew to New York. I remember very specifically at Richard's apartment, looking down the hallway, baking out to go to the restroom or something, seeing them at the end of the hallway and just talking, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw how they looked, their body language, and how they looked at each other's eyes. I said, that's chemistry.
Richard Gere was apparently completely captivated with Julia, and as we all know, he wound up accepting the part.
So you're talking about Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, who end up making one of the best on-screen pairs, I think, in romantic comedy history.
Julia Roberts had landed the role of a lifetime and had helped land an A-list co-star. She was about to have all the success she'd ever dreamed of, but the fruits of her success would prove to have a dark side. In 1989, 22-year-old Julia Roberts' star was on the rise. She had a dramatic role in Steel Magnolias behind her, and had begun a relationship with Dylan McDermott, her handsome co-star in that film. Now she was appearing opposite Richard Gere in Pretty Woman. And right away, she was turning heads.
It was pretty apparent that she was special after we watched the dailies.
I saw that the camera loved her. That's that ephemeral quality.
She brought wonderment to the role. That's very hard to play. She wasn't a rich girl who came from beautiful mansions and things. When she went to the hotel for the first time, she played it for real. She played it like the audience would play it. They don't go to these nice places.
Wow.
She lit up.
Veteran actor Gere was blown away by the energy young Julia was bringing to her performance.
He said, you know, you really don't need me in this picture. You just need my suit. Why don't I leave my suit here and I can go home? Because it's all her.
Listen, I appreciate this whole seduction scene you've got going, but let me give you a tip. I'm a sure thing, okay?
Gary would make her relax. They had a lovely bond together.
We both liked to laugh. She had that spirit of fun.
You know, making movies is very difficult. Laughter is at a premium, especially when you're going into your 13th or 14th or 15th hour. If you can still elicit a laugh, it seemed that Julia was able to do that.
The best prank we did was when she was in the water, in the bathtub, and she went under the water. We all ran. And when she came out of the water, there was nobody on the set. It was a totally empty set. What happened?
Offset, Julia and Dylan McDermott had become engaged. But their relationship disintegrated in the face of Julia's growing infatuation with co-star Richard Gere.
He did not return her interests, but Dylan McDermott came to the set one day and they were doing a very romantic scene and he thought it was very, very realistic.
It rubbed him the wrong way. They got into a huge fight then and there and they broke up, and that was it.
The dramatic breakup nearly derailed Julia's performance. The next day, Marshall shot the famous scene in which Edward gives Vivian a $250,000 necklace to wear.
On film, there was the stuff that you can't write, because that's the stuff that's gold.
Knowing that Julia was depressed after her breakup with McDermott, Marshall and Gere devised a trick.
So I said to Richard, you gotta wake her up a little bit. Let's do something crazy. We'll get her going here. When you show her the jewelry and she goes, grab it, bang the box on her fingers. It was not acting, it was her, and we kept it in.
That was pure and rich and organic. It was terrific.
Pretty Woman was an instant hit, and it cemented 23-year-old Roberts' stardom.
Pretty Woman, I mean, to this day, remains Julia's iconic role.
Julia is the X factor in Pretty Woman that makes it succeed.
She was still relatively unknown, playing opposite this huge superstar, Richard Gere, and yet she burns up the screen in every scene.
Well done! Whoa. Oh, it was so good, I almost peed my pants. You were late.
You're stunning.
You're forgiven.
She's carrying Pretty Woman, and she's suddenly a megastar.
Do you feel as though you've arrived?
Well, I think I've just always been here, and people just kind of are starting to figure out where I am. I don't think I've just arrived. I've been here all along.
So the good news is that she was going to be a success overnight. The bad news is that she was going to be a success overnight.
Julia was not prepared for the onslaught of media attention after the movie. She thought it was so strange and didn't get it.
Pretty Woman, in fact, puts a bullseye on Julia Roberts for every paparazzo or every gossip monger out there.
This was sort of the moment in which her life where she had to give up privacy for the rest of her life.
And of course, that would cause her a good deal of trouble.
As Julia's career took off, though, her older brother Eric's was on the wane. Soon, he and Julia's relationship began to suffer as well.
Julia and her brother Eric had a very, very famous falling out.
On the one hand, he had really tried to help her break into the business. On the other hand, he was doing a lot of drugs. He gets a
Talk for years and years.
She's not happy about it, but she did what she had to do to protect herself when their relationship was getting too tough to handle.
This personal conflict only ratcheted up the emotional intensity of Julia's newfound stardom, and her work pace matched this fever pitch. Without a break, after Pretty Woman, Julia rushed to Chicago to shoot Flatliners.
On the set of Flatliners, Julia Roberts met Kiefer Sutherland.
Julia said it was love at first sight. The minute she saw Kiefer, she just loved him.
He was married and had kids at the time, but they became close. Ultimately, he left his wife.
They became a very public couple, two big, big stars dating each other. They were a very A-list couple at the time.
But Julia's A-list status didn't allow her a moment to savor her new love. Less than 2 months after Flatliners wrapped, she was filming Sleeping with the Enemy. The young star was becoming an old hand on movie sets. So when it came time to shoot a scene in which she was scantily clad, she turned the tables on the crew.
She said, okay, if I'm gonna have to be in my underwear for the next 6 hours, I want everybody else on the set to strip down to their underwear. And they did it, including the director. And Julia said, I'll never forget it, that there was this one very, very quiet little cameraman who was doing something in the corner all the time, never said anything. He says when he took his pants off, he had these vibrantly colored underpants that just made everybody howl, and she said it was worth the price of doing it.
One thing Julia's not is pretentious.
People love Julia on the sets. You know, she's kind of a good old girl. She likes to talk to the crew members.
Wrap my palm. Rolling. We're not rolling, you guys.
I saw her deal with the extras on the set with great empathy. She dealt with them as one of the actors, which they were, so she showed respect. That made a lot of points for me.
So even though she is this massive, huge A-list Hollywood star, you know, she's still kind of a down-home Southern girl, too.
The down-home Southern girl was now pulling in massive amounts of money. Julia, who had made $300,000 for Pretty Woman, was offered a whopping $3 million to star opposite Campbell Scott in Dying Young.
In just 2 or 3 years, she had become like the biggest female star working in Hollywood.
In 1991, Julia was nominated for an Oscar for her performance in Pretty Woman. She didn't win, but attended the ceremony with boyfriend Kiefer Sutherland. The couple's relationship continued to grow.
It became a very, very serious romance, and they two became engaged.
As a PR stunt, 20th Century Fox decided to host and bankroll a lavish wedding for the couple on the studio lot.
They spent almost $1 million, and this was in 1991, on this incredible wedding. 400 guests, amazing food. It was going to be the wedding of the decade.
By the summer of 1991, 24-year-old Julia Roberts had become a huge star. Pretty Woman had grossed $463 million worldwide. And the wedding Julia had planned with fiancé Kiefer Sutherland was the talk of Tinseltown.
It's going to be the event of the year. It's a huge Hollywood media circus. The studio has thrown thousands of dollars at the event to promote these big stars who are about to get married. Invitations have gone out to all of Hollywood's A-list.
In the meantime, Julia and Kiefer have separate bachelor and bachelorette parties.
And Julia apparently meets Kiefer's very close friend, Jason Patric, on the plane to her bachelorette party. The two of them are instantly attracted to one another, fall madly in love.
2 or 3 days before the wedding, Julia called it off.
Julia is such prey for the media at this point that she's having to hide out at her agent's house. There are paparazzi on the lawn, there are helicopters buzzing overhead.
Despite a hectic production schedule, Julia had allotted time for her and Kiefer's honeymoon. Now, she used that time to fly to Ireland with Jason Patric.
And that was sort of what got Julia Roberts the reputation as the runaway bride before she even made that movie.
So it was like this massive, massive tabloid story.
At the time, it seemed like America's love affair with Julia Roberts was in serious jeopardy.
There were several reasons why she broke up the relationship with Kiefer Sutherland. One was that he was very, very publicly having an affair with a stripper, which will always give a woman second thoughts.
There was such huge pressure on the union. There was so much public attention. There was such a big media frenzy. And in the end, she couldn't take it. She had to run away from it all.
She got some sympathy when she explained it, but there were still a lot of people who just thought that she was being very frivolous in matters of the heart.
For the first time, Julia's personal life was getting more attention than her film roles. Despite this attention, Julia moved in with her new boyfriend.
During the period then when she's living with Jason Patric, the media is constantly staking the two of them out at his apartment. Her life really has become a media circus.
I can imagine what that must have been like to turn around and overnight you're on everyone's lips. She became the flavor of the year.
Her life was like, you know, completely up for public display.
For that to happen at that young an age is really something. I don't think I would have handled that at 21, quite frankly, myself.
It's not something that I enjoy having to deal with. I don't like my day to be about, you know, opening up the paper, concerned with what I might read about myself, true or not. You know, that's not enjoyable to me. I feel like I have earned a respect as a performer, and I appreciate that. And now I want the same respect as an individual and as a person.
Jason, Julia, HBO, real quick.
Despite difficulties in her personal life, Julia's professional life was soaring. The studios knew that casting her in a film would ensure attendance by legions of her adoring fans.
Julia Roberts, in many ways, was getting paid not only for her movies, but her value as a star. One of the reasons that you could almost guarantee that she would be able to open a film was that people were really interested in her as a celebrity.
She's showing that she can open a film and that she's bringing people to the film, and you know what? She deserves the money for it.
As further evidence of Julia's arrival as a bona fide superstar, she next landed a role with America's biggest director, Steven Spielberg.
Hook had all the elements of a great vehicle for Julia Roberts. She's playing Tinkerbell in an updated version of Peter Pan, being directed by Steven Spielberg, but everything starts to go wrong.
She played Tinkerbell, so she was always in the air, and she had to be in this harness, and she had to say her lines to the director. There were no actors who were working with her at the same time. And she just said it was a horrible experience. She absolutely hated it.
There are rumors that she and Spielberg aren't getting along.
He said it was not the right time to be working with her because of the Kiefer Sutherland problem.
When the film hit theaters, the critics weren't kind, and they reserved their nastiest comments for Julia.
One critic describes her as looking like a confused horsefly.
Needless to say, Tinkerbell was not one of the greatest moments in Julia Roberts' acting career.
Since her discovery in Mystic Pizza, Julia had starred in 6 major films in 4 years. And she was worn out.
After Hook, Julia was really frazzled. She'd had all that craziness with Kiefer Sutherland. She's had all that craziness with the paparazzi. She was tired, and she just felt she needed to pull back.
She dropped out of the public eye for a couple of years to sort of get her personal life in order and figure out what her next move was.
During this hiatus, yet another personal relationship ended.
Things with Jason Patric didn't go all that well. Julia was a free spirit. She loved the men that she was with, but she never really felt that she needed to be committed to these people.
You know, how do you really manage to maintain a normal, healthy relationship with somebody when every 2 feet, you know, photographers are snapping your picture, they're writing about you in the paper?
So it was hard to date for her, it was hard to have relationships, and it was hard to move on with her career.
Her image had definitely taken a hit because of the Kiefer Sutherland, Jason Patric thing, and she wasn't turning out to be the person that the public wanted her to be.
Still in her early 20s and experiencing the dark side of being in the public's eye, it seemed likely that Julia Roberts' superstar status was in jeopardy.
It was sort of like a crisis moment for her career.
And she was about to top the famous twists of her love life with a hairpin turn that took even her closest friends by surprise. After completing the film Hook, Julia Roberts' image as America's sweetheart had taken a serious hit. Her heavily publicized relationship woes had cost her the good wishes of her public, and she took a 2-year hiatus to pull herself together.
She drove her agent crazy because at the height of her career, she disappeared. She didn't make another movie for 2 years.
Then in 1992, she filmed The Pelican Brief with Denzel Washington. The film was a critical and commercial success and seemed to signal Julia's return to the A-list. But soon, once again, it was her personal life that the public found most intriguing.
So around the time of Pelican Brief, Julia Roberts meets Lyle Lovett, and very quickly they get married, like it's out of the blue.
And it was kind of shocking because Lyle Lovett is not George Clooney, let's face it.
Take a look at Lyle Lovett. I mean, he's no GQ guy, you know?
Julia, however, said she had a deep, tremendous love for the country singer.
Were you surprised by everybody's reaction?
I don't really care.
He was a refreshing change of pace for her. She'd had so many beautiful young actors as her paramours, and, you know, they bring their own problems with them. Lyle Lovett was just a regular Southern boy. She was a Southern girl.
I think that it's strange that people question why someone would marry someone who's wonderful.
But the relationship between the movie star and the country singer was strained from the very beginning.
Lyle Lovett said that he and Julia, during the entire course of their marriage, never spent more than 7 days in a row together.
He had a country singing career. She was in Hollywood.
They didn't ever live together.
You know, Julia and he both realized that they just had made a mistake, that they shouldn't be married, at least.
They actually parted on amicable terms.
With her marriage over, Julia threw herself into her work. But The Pelican Brief turned out to be the rare hit for the young actress in the mid-90s.
She goes on a string of films that were not only not very good in the box office, they weren't very good films. I Love Trouble, these kind of not-so-great flops. There were certainly discussions at that point, sort of what's happened to Julia Roberts. Is she worth what she's getting paid?
People thought, you know, maybe Julia is not going to turn out to be the big star that we thought she was going to be.
When she took on more somber roles, like the title character in Mary Riley, critics were not kind.
Films like Mary Riley were Julia's attempt to be more serious, to prove that she could appeal to an audience without the $1 million smile.
So when she's playing like Mary Riley or playing in Michael Collins, there's something that's too doomy and over dramatic and prestige-y about these movies. Unfortunately, they don't speak to her strengths. Audiences did not like it.
She was losing the romantic comedy audience that had catapulted her to the top of the box office charts.
People wanted to see the smiley, happy Julia Roberts that they knew and loved, and Julia wasn't giving it to them. So she's getting slammed in the career department. She's getting slammed in the personal life department. It's just not a good time to be Julia Roberts.
Then, in 1997, Julia began to recover from her slump.
When she finally kind of makes her way through this sort of fallow period in the mid-90s.
Best Friend's Wedding would be a good place to identify this turnaround, which really, once again, allows her to do all the things that she's really good at doing, both vulnerable and charming.
I can't lose him, George. I'm going to bring him back.
Beautiful and insecure.
Can't win them all.
It's almost like she rediscovers what she's very strong at. She rebounds solidly.
Julia won a People's Choice Award for My Best Friend's Wedding. Another light movie, Runaway Bride, reunited her with Pretty Woman Dream Team, Elizondo, Gere, and Marshall.
One day, my wife said, Richard and Julia is on the phone at my house. And that's a powerful call. They said, hello, we don't want to do Pretty Woman 2, but we want to do something, and we got a script, and you would like it, and you could come. We kid about it, about doing Runaway Bride, because I still have the invitation to one wedding I never got to, because it was canceled.
For Julia, working with her Pretty Woman co-star was familiar territory.
She and Richard just were worked as always yesterday.
And it was like the magic was there again.
In the 9 years since Pretty Woman, though, some things had changed for Julia.
I was trying to shoot a film, and Julia was on the phone saving orphans in Jamaica. And Richard was saving something in Tibet. I was afraid to ask them to act. I would ruin the world. But they were bigger then. There were now forces in our society. They could change things. They could appear someplace and somebody would raise a lot of money. So there's a responsibility to that.
Julia felt a sense of responsibility to her fans as well.
After a day of shooting, people would stand there all day long waiting for them to come out. And I remember one night bringing Julia out about midnight, just say hello, everybody, and people cried. She was such a big star.
I mean, they just loved her. And she was very, very gracious. That's another way she made points with me.
The collaboration with Gere and Marshall worked, and Runaway Bride was box office gold.
People loved this movie. It was a huge success, and it was like finally the magic was recaptured.
Runaway Bride, My Best Friend's Wedding, and Notting Hill, which Julia made in 1999 with Hugh Grant, all marked a return to familiar territory for Julia, the romantic comedy.
These films do really well, and Julia is back.
And there were bright spots in her love life, too.
After Lyle Lovett, Julia decided that she wanted to go back to the handsome young actor. And she was in a restaurant in New York. She saw a passerby, Benjamin Bratt, who America knew as Detective Ronaldo Curtis in Law & Order.
She found him so attractive that she decided to send over a drink with a note. Benjamin Bratt immediately assumed that somebody was playing a practical joke on him, so he didn't respond.
Julia was quite, put out by this. She thought, how rude. And he said that the next day he started to think, well, what if she had, if it really was for real, and she probably thinks I'm the biggest bore on earth.
He got in contact with her immediately. They had a proper date and fell madly in love.
They were a very, very public couple. They were on the cover of lots of magazines.
It became a very serious relationship that lasted really at that point longer than any other.
So great was their love that Julia even agreed to work for scale on an episode of Law & Order opposite Benjamin Bratt.
After her years of romantic turmoil, Julia's pairing with handsome Benjamin Bratt seemed to signal her arrival as true Hollywood royalty. She'd found a groove as a romantic comedian, and her career was back on track. Then, in 1999, Julia surprised everyone by taking a gamble on the kind of serious role that had tripped her up in the past. The title role in Erin Brockovich.
Erin Brockovich herself was a larger-than-life character. She was very glamorous. She wore outrageous costumes. She had a lot of cleavage, and she liked to show it. She was out there. Erin Brockovich was a perfect vehicle for Julia to become more serious actress in.
That to me is what makes her special. She's not just a star, she's aspiring to seriousness. Seriousness can be overrated, but Julia Roberts, I think, gives it a good name.
Critics loved Julia in this role.
With Erin Brockovich, everything comes together.
She has a very keen nose for reality and drama.
Next we got Best Actress Drama, Julia Roberts.
First up, the 2001 Golden Globes.
Receiving awards, actors and actresses like to downplay it. They say, the nomination.
No, it's great. Okay, right? It's really great. I'm really happy.
And in March of 2001, she won her first Oscar for Best Actress.
When Julia Roberts won an Oscar for Erin Brockovich, it was this validation.
For Julia to finally win the Oscar, to get up there in her beautiful gown with her updo hair, and she broke out into tears. This was a moment when Julia could say to herself, I have made it in Hollywood, and no one can deny it.
During this triumphant moment, though, her relationship with Benjamin Bratt was showing signs of faltering.
Julia gave one of the most memorable Oscar speeches ever, but some tongues were wagging because she thanked Benjamin in this really kind of offhand way, like rattling off a list of names, and his name was one of them. It wasn't like the emotional high point of her speech.
This Oscar speech was the first clue that all might not be rosy in Julia's seemingly perfect love life. And indeed, the world would soon discover why. Now in her early 30s, superstar Julia Roberts was back on top. Critics and popular audiences alike had embraced her role in Erin Brockovich. But her relationship with Law & Order hunk Benjamin Bratt became shaky after her Best Actress Oscar win.
Everyone kept talking about the Oscar curse. I mean, you know, you win an Oscar and the relationship is bound to fail.
Curse or not, Julia and Benjamin soon parted ways.
3 months later, they ended up splitting.
Ben Bratt wanted to be married, wanted to have a family. And Julia, at that point in her life, wasn't ready to do that. That was the main reason why they didn't last.
It seemed it was more complicated than that, though. As early as the summer of 2000, months before her Oscar win, someone had caught her eye.
Julia was on the set of The Mexican when she first noticed cameraman Danny Moder working with his shirt off. Apparently, she turned to Brad Pitt and said, "Who is that hunk of burnin' love?"
And Brad said, "You better watch yourself, Julia, you're being a bad girl." And he must have had Benjamin Bratt on his mind because they were still together at the time.
But Julia wasn't good. She sent him a note, and pretty soon they were having an affair on set.
Once again, you know, she started an affair with a very attractive young man while she was involved with another attractive young man.
So Danny Moder was married when he met Julia Roberts.
Vera Moder, Danny's wife, was not happy about this at all.
Once again, Julia's love life was tabloid fodder.
It created a paparazzi frenzy. There was always the fight to get her with her latest boyfriend. It also gave her a bit of a reputation as flighty, as a love him and leave him kind of gal. I don't think Julia cared. You know, she was going to do what she wanted to do, and she did it. The press and everyone else be damned.
I could care less what some person who's never met me has to say about me.
I've had some tremendous interviews with Julia Roberts, and I've had some interviews that haven't been that sensational.
What do you know for sure about love in your life experience?
Oh, nothing that I think is appropriate to share, necessarily. You know, when promoting a movie. This isn't Dear Abby, hon.
But after Julia finally broke up with Benjamin Bratt, and Danny was granted a divorce by his wife, they married.
People didn't expect the relationship with Danny Moder to last, but against all odds, it seems to have worked. They settled down, they have children, they live on a ranch in New Mexico most of the time, and they've really built a very strong and happy family life.
She is not a part of the scene, you know? She doesn't go out to the clubs, she doesn't go out to the parties, the C and B scene restaurants. She's not a part of that. I mean, she's living a very low-key family life.
I think she found a life now that is very satisfying for her.
Maybe this is the love of Julia Roberts' life. Let's hope so. I mean, everybody wishes her happiness.
Fiery Julia seemed to be mellowing, and as she settled down with a family of her own, her relationship with brother Eric was on the mend.
Eric and Julia have had a reconciliation.
Julia had her first children, her twins, Hazel and Phineas, and, you know, invited Eric to the delivery room, and he was there at the hospital with her. That was just sort of like a really magical moment of reconnection for them.
Maybe because she was now a mother and family was foremost in her mind, they were able to patch things up, and they're a lot closer than they used to be.
The early years of the 21st century have been lucrative for Julia.
When she was cast in Ocean's 11, she got a $20 million salary, which absolutely broke the glass ceiling for women's compensation in the film industry.
As she enters her 40s, Julia retains considerable industry cachet.
She still has as much box office power and clout in Hollywood as she ever did.
She's been on the Hollywood Power List for years and years.
She knows the landscape. She knows how to navigate the landscape. And she does it with grace.
Motherhood hasn't slowed down her career. Julia continues to show her range, moving from comedy to romance to drama.
Actually, if you were to ask me what my favorite Julia Roberts performance is, it's not even one when she's on screen. She played the voice of Charlotte in Charlotte's Web, and she was dynamite in that film. Interesting, because I'm not seeing the smile, right?
After Charlotte's Web, audiences got the opportunity to see that famous smile live and in person when Julia fulfilled a lifelong dream. In April of 2006, Julia made her Broadway debut in 3 Days of Rain. Although reviews were mixed, the play's 12-week run sold out. After crossing Broadway off her list, Julia returned to film where she produced Kit Kittredge, An American Girl, and later starred opposite Tom Hanks in director Mike Nichols' Charlie Wilson's War.
Well, I have to have her in any picture whenever I can get her, because no one is more alive or beautiful and a better actress. You forget what a great actress she is because she's so wonderful to look at. But she's everything. Her biggest attribute, I think, is her intelligence.
After her film Fireflies in the Garden was released abroad, her sexy corporate spy flick Duplicity was released stateside. Starring opposite Clive Owen, Duplicity was her biggest lead since Closer in 2004. Critics praised Duplicity and called it Julia's comeback.
In our very first conversations, we were all about how we could possibly conspire to get Julia to do the movie with us, and we made a very high-pressure, intense, begging plea, and then we found out she was pregnant. So we had a bit of a... Pregnant didn't work for the movie.
Pregnancy may not have worked for Duplicity, but it was reprising the role of mother that would bring Julia her greatest joy. In June 2007, she welcomed her third child, Henry, into the world. Although she was now juggling 3 kids and a busy Hollywood career, Julia somehow made being a working mom look easy. Her performance in Duplicity was so well received, Julia was later nominated for a Golden Globe. Then, the pretty woman signed a lucrative contract with cosmetics giant Lancôme to be their global ambassador. In 2010, Julia teamed up with director Gary Marshall for the 3rd time for a cameo in the star-studded Valentine's Day. That same year, Julia's new film, Eat, Pray, Love, was released. But that wasn't the only thing people were talking about. After an interview Julia did during the film's press tour, it was erroneously reported that while shooting in India, Julia converted to Hinduism. The actress chose a press conference in Japan to set the record straight.
I didn't suddenly make this movie and start practicing Hinduism. It's just something that's been part of my life for a very long time. And I realized I should stick with what my mom told me 22 years ago, which is, you're an actor, act, don't talk about politics or religion.
Although it had been over 20 years since she first catapulted to fame in Pretty Woman, according to People magazine, the 40-something working mom still had it. In 2010, Julia was named People's Most Beautiful Person for the 4th time. The following year, she landed on People magazine's Most Beautiful People list for the 13th time. Men's Health magazine jumped on the bandwagon, naming Julia one of their 100 hottest women of all time. As for her film career, 2011 was a bit of a mixed bag for Julia. She starred opposite Tom Hanks in Larry Crown, and executive produced both a TV documentary called Extraordinary Moms and the film Jesus Henry Christ. Lately, Julia is sinking her teeth into a few new roles. The evil queen in Mirror, Mirror, an adaptation of the classic fairy tale Snow White. Dr. Emma Bruckner in The Normal Heart. And Barbara, a complicated daughter opposite Meryl Streep in August Osage County. This small-town girl from Georgia has made it and is here to stay.
Julia Roberts is one of those women who I think is going to remain a star for the rest of her life, like Betty Davis, you know, Joan Crawford, people like that.
She's just so huge as this icon.
Our relationship with Julia Roberts is far from over.
There are only good things in store for Julia. I don't think that she's going to go away anytime soon, only if she wants to.
Is it harder to get you out of the house and out of work because you'd rather be home with your kids?
Is it? Doesn't it, Cheryl? Yeah.
No matter what she does, good or bad, her body of work stands, I think, forever.
Julia has maintained her equilibrium. She knows who she is.
I've led a tremendously blessed life and have always felt that way and have always asserted that feeling of joy onto my present and hopefully my future.
Can I go now? Thank you very much.